Welcome to the Paperless Productivity Podcast, where we have experts give you the insights, know-how, and resources to help you transform your workplace from paper to digital, while making your work life better at the same time.
Thank you for joining me. My name is Kevin Kolkowski, and I'll be your host for today's podcast. Recently, ImageSoft hosted our annual customer conference Velocity 2021 virtually. While we were not able to host our event in person as we normally do, this year's event was still packed full of the industry's hottest topics plaguing organizations today. The weekly sessions included Q&A with industry leaders, a review of digital technology solutions including live demonstrations of our digital evidence management, online dispute resolution, and electronic signature solutions. For today's podcast, we wanted to share an edited portion of the Digital Evidence Management, or DEM session with Peter Hagood, established civil attorney and digital evidence enthusiast. With over 25 years of hands-on experience, Peter understands how crucial evidence is to his role and how digital evidence management can benefit attorneys, district attorneys, and other roles within the court system. Let's listen in as Scott Bade, our CEO and product visionary at ImageSoft, introduces Peter Hagood.
Without further ado, I am going to introduce Mr. Hagood. Peter is an attorney who's been practicing law for some 2 decades. He's a litigator. He's practiced in a variety of case types: real estate, community association law, personal injury, insurance litigation, civil, healthcare, not a ton of criminal. Peter is very passionate about the law. He's a student of the law. He's co-authored and presented at a number of seminars. So he's a subject matter expert in many areas and a leader in the legal community, particularly in the state of Florida. He's a member of the Florida Bar, U.S. District Court for Middle District of Florida, and member of the Orange County Bar. So without further ado, thank you and welcome, Peter Hagood.
Scott, thanks for having me. I appreciate it and look forward to having an open discourse with you. I think the product that you're talking about is a need that has been out there for some time, and I think that the attorneys are the ones who are going to benefit from it tremendously, as well as the court system. But over the last 5 or 10 years, I've seen this trend, people who are scared of the cloud and don't want to acknowledge it and have been fighting it, but I think it is the future, and I think that this product is going to allow those people to integrate what they do on a daily basis. And so it's exciting to talk to you and to your company about it.
Thanks, Peter. So not everybody on this call is an attorney. So can you just give us a day in the life? Let's say you're working on a complex civil case or even a criminal case. What's it like managing evidence, particularly digital evidence that maybe you're receiving from defendants or from as discovery from the other side? Can you just kind of talk in general about how you manage that as a long-term practicing attorney?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because it's one of the most problematic things to do, especially in a complex case. And I'm going to use one of my cases that we're dealing with now, which is a construction litigation case. And when you start the lawsuit and you start to do your discovery, it sometimes is just staggering the amount of documents that you start to have come in. But on top of that, it's not just the written documents or the hard documents. Sometimes you're going to have a mixed amount of evidence that you're going to be using. For instance, you'll have potentially some video, you'll have some photographic evidence, you may have some actual hard evidence, meaning product type of rebar or type of lumber or something that you're using that you're going to need to, and that you can't use and you have to bring in eventually. But the nice part about, or the hardest part about what I deal with on one of those complex cases, is the voluminous amount of evidence that needs to be stored in a capacity that can be easily accessible throughout the duration of the case. So the documents continue to come in, you red flag them and you mark them, but the documents continue to come in and come in and come in until some point, discovery is cut off. But then you've got to go back and organize them and be able to present them. And sometimes it's presenting one form of evidence along with another that makes it difficult. And especially when you go to trial, and especially in the light of COVID and the pandemic, I was not in the courthouse for over a year. We just started going back to hearings in person in the last 2 months. Before that, everything was via Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something like that. And that was even more problematic with regard to evidence production. But what I find as a civil practitioner is the voluminous amount of evidence that you have, and trying to marshal it and keep it organized in one location, and then have it easily accessible, not only to yourself, but to the judge, maybe during hearings or pre-trial hearings or evidentiary hearings, things of that nature. That's when it becomes very problematic, because you don't want to carry in 10 boxes of documents only to pull out a certain amount, but you have to be prepared in case you have to look for something or find something. So what this product is, I think, going to help, and from what I see and what I know of it, and the limited use that I have of it, is that it allows the practitioner to easily organize different forms of evidence and then present or access it in an easy manner. That's the biggest problem I have with the complex cases and the amount of evidence that I have. I've got to bring a staff member, if not two, sometimes to a hearing and or trial, simply to help me with finding documents. And that becomes a burden. It's time consuming. You have to know where everything is. They have to know where everything is. And so it really is a challenge for a practitioner in a complex civil case. And I can only imagine in a complex criminal case what it would be like.
You mentioned the pandemic, and you're just now getting back into the courtroom. So have you seen, and maybe it's too early, but have you seen any changes in the way the courts are requiring you to work related to evidence because of the pandemic?
Yeah, and in fact, I can tell you that in some specifically, and this is a huge topic in the state of Florida, is evictions, the moratorium on evictions, mortgage foreclosures were an issue. All the hearings that you typically would have done in person went to an online format, which meant any and all the documents that you may have presented at that hearing had to be filed with the court or accessible to the court prior to the hearing. And they had, every county had a little bit of a different format, but where you might be able to have a notice of something that hadn't been filed yet, all was now required to be filed prior to the hearing, so that the court could review it, the court had access to it. And again, I think that's the trend where we're going on just in general, but the pandemic certainly brought that to the forefront and made it a priority. And a lot of the counties have changed their local rules, and a lot of the judges have too. Sometimes judges have a certain format that they want you to follow and certain things they want you to do. But overall, it required you to make sure that anything that you were going to present or discuss or argue was within that court file. And typically that's not unusual, but when you can't do it physically, now you've got to do it virtually or through some type of software that we're talking about today.
And I know you're not a criminal attorney, but you're still dealing with evidence in civil cases and other types of cases that you handle. Speak to the layman out there and talk to the IT people. What are the rules for handling and managing and preserving evidence that you're aware of that we need to be conscious of? Just to preface, I think everybody's aware of the chain of custody rules regarding criminal evidence, but I know there's got to be some rules and regulations around all types of evidence that maybe you could speak to that in general.
Sure, and I'll go into some specifics because I think you mentioned it earlier. But when we talk in the civil aspect, you're really talking about the preservation of different types of evidence, whether it's cell phone information, video information, hard documents, spoliation of evidence, which is making sure that those documents stay in their original format. And so a plaintiff and or a defendant could certainly get themselves into some trouble by disposing of or intentionally deleting or and somehow altering the original format of evidence. I had a case a number of years ago that involved, and you had mentioned this, a video platform that maybe was the video technology was saved on a certain carrier's, and I'm not sure their correct term, but was used in their system. And it came down to it. They didn't want to produce it. We got a court order for them to produce it. And so they sent it to us. And I went to open it and to watch it. And guess what? I couldn't watch it. I couldn't, because my system wouldn't merge with their system, wouldn't acknowledge it. I couldn't view the evidence that they had produced. And they advised the court that they had complied with the court's order. And I told the judge that they have by the letter of the law they had, but I can't view what they're sending me. And I think part of the issue that you had talked about earlier is this software that will allow for that integration of that video to be used by both the defense and the plaintiff equally and similarly and simultaneously, so that there's no unfair, I guess, way that both parties could view the same thing and the court at the same time could view it. And so that's a thing that is specific to me because that video was the key to the case. That video showed the incident that was alleged. It showed the conduct both before, during, and after. And once that video was then, we were able to dissect it and view it, the case resolved simply because of that. So when we talk about how important is this type of evidence, this digital preservation, it is absolutely important in some instances, especially in light of, and again, I don't do a lot of criminal, but from the civil perspective, there are cameras everywhere. There's video everywhere. And so when we're talking about potentially motor vehicle accidents or personal injuries of any kind, and there's cameras out there, but those cameras are being saved on different systems, whether or not those systems can be integrated so that everybody can view that document in its original format becomes a critical issue.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, just to reiterate, part of the solution is a tool. There is technology that was actually developed by former law enforcement people. So it was developed in a very strict and precise way. Part of the trick with video is whenever you compress video, you lose frames. And losing frames is a no-no in the evidence world. Even if the frame is apparently unimportant, you can't compress and lose frames. So that's part of the challenge, is being able to read a format that maybe was proprietary and turn it into or render it into a format that is viewable in a public player, like anything on your Windows or Mac machine or your phone, and have it be an exact representation, and be able to, more importantly, if it's ever challenged, bring in an expert witness that can explain why we had to render it and why it's exactly the same video and audio that was from the original camera. That's a really important point. It's a bit nerdy tech speak, but video is a complicated thing because it's a combination of many pictures, obviously, and audio. And so it's a more complex format than obviously a PDF or even just audio, because it has multiple dimensions to it. And there are so many ways that the video can be compressed and changed to make it more usable by certain platforms like your phone. But you can't do that if you're going to try to present this to court. So you have to kind of push aside a lot of the tooling that maybe is available in the commercial world because it's not good enough. And you really have to use specialized tools. And the good news is those tools are now mature. They've been out there for a while. The tool we work with, a product called Input Ace, can handle virtually, with a high 90% conversion rate, every format that's known in the closed circuit and body worn camera world or in the cell phone video world. So there is good news on that front. There are tools, and that's part of the solution that we offer is providing some server-based tools that can, in mass quantities, convert this, or I should say render this, into a format that's more usable downstream. So that's great.
Well, I'm going to comment on the digital, the video. There's another case we had about 2 years ago where we had a video that, again, was depicting the alleged incident both before, during, and after. It was a video of a gas pump, and there was an incident that happened around the gas pump. I won't go into exactly what happened, but the defendants had showed a video clip of it. And during trial, we recognized that the video seemed to be different than what was discussed and what was argued at and what was shared prior to trial. And ultimately, it was determined that they had altered their clip that they were going to show by deleting almost 3.5 minutes. And the 3.5 minutes were immediately after where this alleged incident happened, and it particularly showed my client in the area, but not doing what was allegedly said that they had done or not done. And again, so it was funny because that was what's happening. And when you're talking about a video, there's not really much you can do, but when you can go analyze it in the format that you're talking about, you can specifically talk about what frames are missing and show those frames. And what we ended up doing is terminating that day of court, coming back the next day. But we had to scramble all night, get a video production guy to say, here's the 3.5 minutes that they deleted, here's what it shows. And I think what you're talking about would allow that to happen in a much faster, almost real-time situation in the right hand. So again, when we talk about these solutions, is exactly what I think the court system needs.
Yeah, it can turn everyday folks with a little bit of tech knowledge into experts on video very quickly. And you're absolutely right. In most cases, it's very, very difficult to alter a video and not leave any evidence behind that you've altered it. It's almost impossible because things, like you said, if frames are missing, it becomes pretty obvious. I don't know if you have had to deal with any phone evidence Peter, I know that everybody's got smartphones now, and there's all sorts of evidence on a phone, from text messages to pictures to video.
Right now, we're dealing with a case like that, and we're trying to get the phone carrier to release their documents, and it's a burden. They don't want to. We've got to go to the court to get that order to compel them. Their attorneys jump in claiming all kinds of privileges and proprietary issues, which I don't think they really are. But all we want to do is get all the text, not just one part of the text. We want the whole from the beginning to the end so that we can see the entire context of what it was, as opposed to one screenshot. I think that's what we're seeing more and more. And so again, your tool, which allows for that enormous amount of data to be captured and then organized, is going to be paramount to helping out both prosecution and defense. I mean, it's, works both ways. But it's funny because that's something that we're dealing with now. I've got a case where I've got 100 different screenshots of part of one message because we can't get the entire stream from the carrier. So it's certainly relevant right now. And again, we're just looking for the context of what was said between the two parties. And this is in a civil matter, not a criminal matter. So again, very relevant.
Peter, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your perspective. I know this was short and we could probably go on for another hour, but thank you again for joining us. Much appreciated.
Well, Scott, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about ImageSoft's evidence-based solution for storing, sharing, and streamlining your court cases, please visit www.imagesoftinc.com/courts/digital-evidence-management. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us on this podcast. To learn more about ImageSoft, please visit ImageSoftInc.com. That's ImageSoftInc.com. If you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to Paperless Productivity, where we tackle some of the biggest paper-based pain points facing organizations today. We'll see you next time.